Our modern sex-saturated society is certainly not much help. Although we live in a time when sexuality issues are discussed more openly and frankly than ever before, much of the popular discussions of sex is based on dreams, fantasies, and human ideas rather than on truth, reality, and the wisdom of the ages. Everywhere we turn, we are bombarded by sexual images and messages. Sex drives both the entertainment and the advertising industries. It fills the airwaves and the movie theaters. It is used to sell everything from shaving creams to automobiles. Even our everyday speech is peppered with sex talk. Some people seamlessly cannot hold a conversation unless it is laced with sexual references. Yet, for all of our talking and thinking about sex, much of our society remains largely ignorant of the subject because so much of our dialogue is based on error and misconceptions. Another sad truth is that the modern church typically has little to add to this discussion. This is especially tragic because believers who know and follow the God who created sex and established its proper parameters should be able to speak more intelligently and confidently about it than anyone else. Yet, the community of believers is often silent in the public forum regarding sex, whether because of embarrassment, confusion, timidity, or a sense that the subject of sex is either too personal or too sufficiently spiritual for the church to weigh in on publicly. Sex is not a side issue with God. The Bible has much more to say on the subject of sex and sexual relations than most people are aware of. Sexuality is fundamental to God's design and plan for humanity. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Genesis 1:27, emphasis added. Male and female are gender distinctions that imply sexuality. Sex also lies at the very core of God's initial instructions to the first human couple to be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Genesis 1:28b. Although, as we saw in the previous chapter, this command deals essentially with dominion and the stewardship of resources, it certainly also includes sexual activity as a fundamental principle. Sex is not a side issue with God. Because of its importance to human experience and because of the widespread confusion that exists on the subject today, it is crucial that we come to a biblical understanding of sexuality in order to counter the errors and misinformation that are so prevalent in our society. We need to understand what sex is not, what it is, and what its purpose is, as well as establish guidelines for acceptable sexual activity within the context of a biblical marriage. Sex is not love. In the eyes of the world, sex and love are synonymous. Even the most casual pursuit of today's newspapers, magazines, books, movies, and television programs will make this clear. Much of the material in these media treats sex and love as if they are inseparable, as if there is no difference between them. The logical outflow of this view is the philosophy that says, if you love me, you'll let me. After all, if sex and love are the same, How can you claim to love someone and yet decline to have sex with him or her? Closely related to this is the view that sex is proof of love. How often do we encounter this scenario in books or on film? A man meets a woman and they hit it off well. The next thing we know, they are in bed together. This is our tip off that they are in love. They must be in love. They're having sex, aren't they? It may be an adulterous relationship with one or both of them married to someone else. But that doesn't matter. All that matters is that they are in love. They go to bed, have their fling, get up the next morning, and everything is fine. That's the picture the world paints. What these books and films rarely, if ever, reveal is the negative side to these kinds of encounters. In real life, sexual liaisons of this type produce in most people feelings of guilt, shame, and a sense of being dirty, not to mention a deep absence of fulfillment. It may be fun for a moment, but it leaves them feeling empty, and often they don't know why. The idea of sex as love is one of the biggest lies with which the world has perverted God's original design for sexual expression, enjoyment, and fulfillment. The idea of sex as love is one of the biggest lies with which the world has perverted God's original design for sexual expression, enjoyment, and fulfillment. Sex is not spiritual. Love, true love, is spiritual in nature. Sex is not. Sex is 100% physical and chemical. That is why we run into problems whenever we try to equate love with sex. Love is a spiritual union between two people, a joining of spirit to spirit. Sex is a physical coupling of two people, a joining of flesh to flesh. In its proper use, sex is a beautiful and fulfilling physical expression of the spiritual joining that is true love. Love is a spiritual union between two people, a joining of spirit to spirit. Sex is a physical coupling of two people, a joining of flesh to flesh. Understanding this distinction will help us guard against falling prey to a lot of the weird ideas floating around out there that try to convince us that sex is or can be some fantastic kind of spiritual bonding or getting in touch with the spiritual realities of life. It is nothing of the sort. Sex is an exhilarating physical experience, but in and of itself, there is nothing spiritual about it. Sexual activity never bonds us spirit to spirit with another person. Nowhere does the Bible teach that a sexual experience will cause us to see God or be brought close to Him. Sex is a product of the human part of our makeup and has nothing to do with our spirit. Rather, our God-given sexual drive is an appetite that must be brought into subjection to and controlled by our spirit. Our spirit is to rule over our flesh. Sex is an appetite. Sex is an appetite, one of many appetites that God built into us when He created us. Whether we call them drives, cravings, hungers, passions, or whatever, they are still appetites. We have an appetite for food, an appetite for water, an appetite for sleep, an appetite for sex, an appetite for God, you name it. All of these are perfectly normal. God designed us for appetites.